Alright, so now that I've got all that insulation pulled out of my attic, I'm going to focus on some of these electrical issues that I found. In the upstairs hallway, there's two lights controlled by two three-way switches. Something in this system is wired wrong, causing one light to turn on and the other to turn off when you flip the switch. I hadn't really troubleshot the issue yet, but I assumed it was in this wiring mess here. I also didn't like how the wiring from the switch was pinched between two sheets of plywood and the floor joist before going down to the light switch. I disconnected all the wires so that I could start from scratch and identified the hot wire that comes from the switch. I also took a screenshot of a similar three-way wiring diagram that I could use as a reference. I wanted to be sure that I was using the right wiring diagram, so I temporarily reconnected all of the wires according to the diagram before permanently rerouting the wires. When I turned the power back on to the system, it immediately tripped the breaker, so I assumed there must be something wrong with the wiring in the switch. Once the switches were out of the wall, I noticed that they were wired wrong. I disconnected each of the wires, identified the hot wire, and then reconnected them according to the diagram. Once I had the system wired correctly, I tested it before I put the switches back in the wall. I checked the switches on each side to make sure both switches were wired correctly. Once I confirmed they were, I reinstalled the switches and put on faceplates. Now that I had the lighting figured out, I went back into the attic to determine how I wanted to run the new Romex. When I got in there, I decided it was too dark. I knew that I wanted to add lights to the attic anyway, so I put this project on hold so that I could add the lights now. I checked to see what materials I already had before going to the store to buy the materials I'd need. I had most of the materials that I needed to install these lights. However, I still needed to go to Home Depot and get 100 feet of 14.2 Romex and 25 feet of 12.3 Romex. While I was there, I also picked up a couple twin head lights. I installed the switch low so that I could reach it from the stairs as I entered the attic. Next, I installed two electrical boxes to mount the lights to. Before mounting the boxes, I installed Romex clamps, the ground wire screws, and two machine screws. It was much easier to install those things while free to move the box in my hands. I spliced into the power to my bedroom ceiling fan and used it to supply the power to the attic lights. I rerouted the power supply to the light switch box and used Romex staples to secure it to the 2x4 studs. Next, I used the 14.3 Romex that I already had to extend the power supply from the light switch box to the electrical box that controls the bedroom ceiling fan. Then, using the 14.2 Romex that I bought, I connected the two boxes that I had installed in the ceiling. Once all the wire was run, I reconnected the power supply to the bedroom ceiling fan while branching off power down to the light switch for the attic. I then added a short piece of 14.2 Romex from the ceiling box to the larger junction box to be controlled by the light switch. Now that power was supplied to the light switch box, I reconnected each of the wires, leaving a short pigtail to power the switch. Now that I've got adequate lighting, I can reroute the wires for the hallway lights. Using a notebook that I keep in my back pocket, I made a list of which wire was connected to which wire that I could reference later. I reused the boxes that were originally used for the hallway wiring. After removing all the abandoned wiring, I installed new ground screws. I used 1.5-inch galvanized screws that I already had to mount the boxes to the studs. Then I rerouted the Romex and mounted the boxes. After relocating the first box, I focused on moving the second, more complicated box. Using the claw on my framing hammer, I pulled up the plywood just enough that I could pull out the Romex and reroute it. Once the wiring was free from the plywood, I used Romex staples and stapled it to the 2x6s above. Then I mounted the box and secured the wires into it. I used both the 14.2 Romex that I bought and the 12.3 Romex that I bought to connect the hot box to the other box that I had already installed. This box was only used as an extension, so I simply matched up the wires by color and reconnected them. As neatly as I could, I placed the wires into the box and secured it with the lid. Now that that box was done, I routed the 14.2 Romex and the 12.3 Romex to the other side. Using my notebook and the reference guide that I made, I connected each of the corresponding wires. Lastly, I noticed that there was a thermostat-controlled exhaust fan in our attic that had been disconnected. It looked like the attic fan was abandoned when the bedroom ceiling fan was installed. I rerouted the wiring for the attic fan to the switch box for the attic lights. Then using a Bic lighter, I tested the thermostat switch for the fan. Once all the wiring was done, I installed a new switch and faceplate for the attic lights.